Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Transport for North Scrutiny Committee. 1st of June. I'd like to welcome new members and I'd like to let people know that Roger Jones is there retired and Neil Hughes is now going to the board. I'd like you all to note that this session is being filmed, but it's not being streamed live on this occasion. It will, however, be on YouTube later. I suspect it will be on there. It will not be edited. So please realise that you are being recorded. So today we've got three main things on the agenda, substantive items. But before that, it's our annual meeting. So therefore, we will have to look to elect a chair and then a majority and minority vice chairs. So I'd just like to ask Gary, have we got apologies for today?
Yes, apologies that we received from Cooper, Councillor Thatcher, Councillor Dixon, Ash.
And Councillor Rachel. Yeah. Thank you. If you need a voice in, answer a pound. So, are there any declarations of interest?
I declare an interest in the following debate. Don't think likely to positive.
Thank you, and that probably gives us yet another insight, and so that would be very valuable. Any other declarations of interest? Move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. I've looked at these and I believe that the two previous meetings minutes are correct. But anybody have anything to say about this? Could I have a proposal? John Davidson, seconded. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm never going to hand over to
You tell what minutes. Could I just ask about the meeting with study? It's in relation to the HS2 where that has got to it's referred to.
I'm not sure whether anyone you can answer that. Can you answer that?
Yeah, so it's something that we're still waiting from the activity being organised.
So I'm going to Councillor who will chair the meeting for the nomination and election of a chair.
What nominations for the chair?
Thank you very much for being here. Should we propose and second? I propose.
Yeah, we can do that. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'll say.
Okay, then Matthew proposed and John second. Thank you. Oh.
That's it. Thank you.
Very quick, John. That we do last year. Everybody.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your vote. Hopefully, good confidence in myself, and I hope to deliver for you again this year. We now have to elect 2 vice chairs. I have one candidate, which is Nisha. Are there any other candidates for vice chair? So, other side. Dave is John said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
The Constitution says that we should have 2 vice chairs, but we can defer the election of a second one to the next meeting. As there's quite a few members missing today. It's a fair thing to do. One of the things I intend to do over this year is I have a pre-meeting brief with officers for these meetings in order to expedite them and make sure that we don't have too much on the agenda. Some of our meetings can get quite long and quite detailed. So one of the things I will be doing is where the vice will be issued one of the vice chair, I will be bringing them along to pre-briefing meetings such that should I not be here or should things change for next year, we've got a succession plan so that things continue to run smoothly. Administration. So thank you for that. And the next item, which I have to read apparently, is what we got up to last year. So the work we achieved over the last year. So I'll just pull up the paper and you'll be able to see that we did a number of things last year. So the purpose of this report is just to make a formal record of what we're doing, so that because Transport Force also has an audit committee, and the audit committee writes a report. So I just detailed along the diary what we actually did last year. So it's important. One of the things that we do have is the option to have 6 meetings a year. At the moment, we have 4 that actually shadow the board. We have got the option to have additional meetings should members want to investigate something additional. Maybe you have a pet topic that might be Leeds Rail, or it might be Manchester Rail, that is often a burning issue for us. So we do have that option. And those extra 2 meetings can be conducted online as well. So the items, when you look at the actual items, you'll see that we appear to only have 3 meetings last year, and that's true. The other time we asked with the Queen that we couldn't hold our September meeting and we couldn't find a suitable alternative date. So we covered those topics there. Are there any questions about what we achieved last year or what to achieve this year for that matter?
Achieve more.
Well, yeah, and it was I was having a chat with one of the members earlier, and I thought it was quite useful. And I'm going to share one of his pieces of wisdom, if that's okay. And that was, he sends papers when they come out. He actually sends them to his officers to ask them for comment, as well as having his own comment. And I thought that was quite useful, because one of the challenges we have is we have soft power rather than what I would call, firm powers. But the more messages we can get out to our particularly to the officers, that the now Transport for the North is more what I would call advisory and offers in-depth consultancy. And today we've got 2 of the papers today have actually got quite a lot of useful bits in there. So I do think that's a useful way of using these meetings, as well as scrutinising the papers before they go before the main board.
Yeah, I'm just checking, like, there must be some confidential stuff as well. Are we allowed to share with officers?
I'll take advice on that. If we get confidential items, I don't suppose we can share.
We don't tend to get many confidential items, so scrutiny ban. It's probably just worth taking advice on an ad hoc basis on that. I would think it's the opportunity of sharing the officers as long as it can say that.
Because in some transport community papers, they just tell us these are the confidential, can't share it. And some of them, they have already got the information, everybody got the information. That's what my concern is. So do we know which one is confidential and which is not?
If we're in a confidential, they have to say there's really not some state based result.
Okay, thank you for that. An important notes printed. So are there any other comments on this particular item? Okay, I shall move to the next item, which is the Manchester Strategy Advice Update. This is Charlie who's going to present to us.
Very much so. Yeah, for those of you who not having used the child investment manager within the strategic rail team. The report that we brought to you today sets out proposals to update the statutory advice in relation to Central Manchester. The report provides context and the rationale for why we feel that the advice is needed. The original advice that was issued was back in 2020. It set out recommendations for a package of infrastructure interventions, primarily on the Battlefield corridor in Manchester, and Manchester Village Station. And it included quite a substantial remodel of Manchester Road Station and additional plans to Manchester Village in 2015-16. In the time that has passed since that advice was made, the Manchester Task Force, which brings together network rail operators, ourselves, and Greater Manchester. The plans for Central Manchester have been revisited, and it's been determined that the original plans for Manchester wouldn't deliver the outcomes that are needed. Whilst they would deliver benefits, they won't address all of the issues in Central Manchester. The cascade crossing all. A new plan is being devised, which looks over the longer term, so how you can Central Manchester and surrounding network that they might look at some of the larger schemes in the region, fixes to Transparent Route upgrade and Northern Powerhouse Rail. And it sets out a series of packages of interventions that are now in configuration states. Configuration state 1 is where we're at now. So that was completed just before Christmas, at the December 22 timetable change and brought about service changes that infrastructure investment enabled. Through that, you'll notice in the paper that we've seen some substantial improvements in train service performance through the region. The notable one is the 40% reduction, which is a huge impact and delivered far beyond what the model expected. The next stage, configuration state 2, you may have seen in recent news, of course, DfT have just confirmed funding, 72.3 million. Delivery of those elements. That includes turn back to inside Manchester Victoria, new platform solved and some passenger circulation improvements in Victoria as well. They will enable a further zero change in mid-2020. Configuration stage 3 is then the next package that looks towards the end of the decade, and that's focused on rail corridor, Manchester Road and Manchester Village. There is development funding in place for that, and the task force options are being developed, but they are quite different to what was in HC proposals, and therefore the advice that we've currently got in place, especially outdated company development to what is the revised plan for Manchester. So the draft that's included in the appendix to the report, what we proposed to be our new statutory advice. What we've tried to do is slightly change our approach. So rather than previously we specified which outputs we wanted to see in terms of Canadian infrastructure interventions, we don't intend to do that on this occasion. Instead, we're putting forward recommendations for outcomes to achieve. You will see that there's 4 key outcomes on there that look at quantity of service, level of train service performance, capacity for train service growth, and all about the storing and connectivity to and from Manchester, all including those compromised at the December time service change. Within the advice, we also set out a number of recommendations for how we believe Department and rail departments can achieve this. Very much seeking clear long-term plan with committed funding that addresses all of the issues that mean that Manchester will function as it should have done for many years, but also be ready to accommodate future services as well as agency. So today we're looking for support for that revised advice, also that the also progress through debt board and tier 4 places. But welcome those from councillors on the advice itself and where we reach.
Thank you, Charlie. So he's looking for input on this. Perhaps any comments? I do have some comments that I'd ask Gary to read out that are coming from one of our members, Steve Parish. But let's start with you, John.
Touched on the service to Manchester. One of the things that has angered residents around Lincolnshire, and I guess anywhere along the Trans-Pennine route, especially those that are less able to like to travel to the airport. Obviously, the timetable change meant they had to get off the train, drag their luggage across to another platform. It wasn't very easy, and then they got around. In our proposal, you didn't really explain what our like lobbying, if you want to call it that, to try and get that reversed now, so that any Trans-Pennine train that's bound for Manchester can basically do what it did before, which is put into Piccadilly, reverse back out and go around the loop to Manchester Airport. I mean, that will be fantastic, and just wondered if your advice going forward is clear on that point. Especially now that it's obviously now it's nationalised, isn't it?
Yeah, so you'll see within the proposed advice there are references made to direct rail access from Sheffield to the airport. That is in there as a recommendation.
Yeah.
We are also
It starts to click up, so
it does. Yeah, that service group. Yeah, that recommendation is in there. There were also various work streams that were starting on with support looking at how you could restore that connection. Now it's a difficult one, not necessarily a case of one in, one out for how you swap service configuration. Putting the service complete doors to example during back off the airport could eradicate towards the real capacity service. What we want to look at is what are the boundary possibilities of current infrastructure, then also challenge statements for the wider industry of what infrastructure would be needed to put that service back in its previous state, as it were, without impacting train service performance.
yeah.
They're 2 work streams that we have to address.
Well, obviously, we know the timetable that's sacrificed.
Yeah.
So it's quite detrimental. So, I mean, I wouldn't dream of catching the train to the airport, because of it. I have done. It was quite useful to be able to sit on there and just go up the terminal, but now, and I suspect a lot of people are talking to don't use the train anymore for that reason.
So thank you very much for that, John. I'd like to piggyback on, which is, I would like to see what the financial impact economy as a result of this. But in terms of your outcome focused approach, I think it's a little disappointing, but one of the points is something that was a great paper written on. I think we saw it last time, which is about the social inequality. And I think John's point brings that out. You know, we've extolled the virtues of being able to be social equality, whether you're less able to sight impairment or you don't have a lot of money. And I just think that needs to be one of these things. And possibly the other thing is about enabling people to travel by alternative transport. So there's nothing here about enabling one shift. And so right now, I was sat in nobody said said anything to do with one shift or decarbonisation. Then it can possibly, in my head, have dealt with all the issues that surround this. But the social inequality form that I think resonates. I think the decarbonisation is the way you actually get the mission.
The timetable, future timetable. So you have already changed one in May 2023.
Yeah, there was a minor change. 2020.
Yeah, the next one is due December. Yes. So are you making more changes or you just, because my concern is from Leeds to Manchester. So the first speed stop. So are they still going to be in river speed, Manchester or that's more?
Yeah, that's my understanding. So the timetable change that we saw in December was more significant, like a big recast of services where you saw changes to the origin and destination pairings. What we're seeing now is through the 6 monthly update timetables, there's not expected to be any changes that are as significant as they were. Both to the baseline in December. There will be some changes. The operators do tweak the timetables to make sure that they are getting maximum efficiency and but the calling patterns don't often change.
If we get the notice in advance or just last month?
Yeah, there's a formal consultation process that the operators go through.
It's not going to be happening in the past, like they also said and stop something and then we have to lobby for that.
I can't guarantee it. It's not something that there are mechanisms in place, but the train operators should be consulted with the stakeholders on any changes.
Thank you, Chair. Just piggybacking through the ideas of some things I noticed in the report, rather. So I didn't really notice the mention of decarbonisation measures. Perhaps it's not particularly the remit of this entirely and to get into the minutiae. However, I'm just cautious that I don't miss the boat on it. But in a few years' time, I'm coming back looking at these plans, go, well, now how do we retrofit these lines? How do we retrofit these services and the rolling stock? So that would be my first question. And if you'll give me a second. So can I also mention the requirements of like DDA compliance, such as like tactile pavements? Because we've just added something like Paragon interchange and it makes a lot of difference to the person who uses it. It's really easy for us to overlook these small details that really do have a difference because we're looking at the grand scheme, but I imagine that will always be welcome and appreciated by those who use it. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, happy to look at where we can weave in people tap to the lights. The train operators have funds they can do it, but if there are opportunities through this package of work where you're going in doing work at a station, there'd be minimum standards that we apply anyway. So, for example, the new platform that's going in Salford Present will be built to the latest station accessibility standards. But absolutely, where that can be solved.
Thank you very much. I'm just about to ask Gary I'm going to check the first. Have you had the questions from Steve Patch?
I do not.
Okay, well, Gary, you have to do this in the voice of Steve Patch. Steve is passionate about what his friends around mornings.
Let's go.
Thank you.
So there are a number of points that Steve raised and the lot makes sense, which is what multi-work was in. Yeah, that's a little bit about. So part to people two. How do we know whether the 40% reduction in delays will be achieved in order to create particular TPE? Have run all the claims they were supposed to run? It's not surprising that all of the actual delays produced TPE failure to delay run. 3.4, the list of collaborators is limited. What collaboration was there with areas affected by alterations who are not represented on the management tables? And then a few examples here. The 1 train an hour renewals and cord breaks expectations of through services to Manchester Airport, North East. And obviously released questions about the original business case cord. And through trains to the airport Sheffield are now very few. And based on contention that for it reversal to be delayed, more option makes it difficult. So more operationally difficult. Terminating services which occupy platform far longer. Benefits of benefit of free TP services by CLC to the work is hard to judge because Stoke operated. And the reduction of services on the CLC found it by failures that Warrington in reduced service, some long lasting service between Warrington and Manchester, both Northern and CP onto services at similar times. Warrington West is another example of business case build because of the reduction of really the corridor. Then in relation to 3.1, 3.11, what's the case? I envisage how conflicts could be avoided on Oxford Road and Bay Platform. 3.16, what package proposals have been delivered, increasing services and alternatives, large chain priority. That's a customer IO2 platforms really not we need a very robust business case. It's actually not intended with section page 26, increasing capacity of the corridor with no less than 16 trains per hour, way able to operate with reliability between Autumn Lane, Junction, Caterpillar Junction, and Master Piccadilly. Should choose say 16 CPA between Junction, 16 CPA between Autumn Lane and Caterpillar Junction, not allowed any CRC services Caterpillar Junction.
So the final point is that he feels that the third paragraph in the statutory advice to in this regard, much of the task force acts as an example of the benefits of a collaborative approach, and as such could be used to inform other aspects of the relevant reform agenda and the form of establishment of frameworks and relevance. So you've got quite a list of points there. Where do you wish to come back to at this point?
I think given the technical capacity, taking all best to offline by the sort of that.
Could you share that with all the members? I think that's probably better, but Steve took time and he's yes, he's damaged his back. Traveling on the train, not the. So thank you very much for that. Are there any more questions for Charlie on this particular piece? So if I just quickly sum up, we've given you a list of things to perhaps take away and consider adding to the board paper, in particular two additional outcomes, which I hope we'll discuss with officers, other officers as well, just to see. We recommend that it's about social equality. It's about what else to do decarbonisation.
Chair, I could perhaps make a suggestion actually. I think Charlie's been working on this in parallel to us to get a revised strategic transport plan, which is now out for consultation, which has got 3 core ambitions: economic performance, decarbonising surface transport, and more opportunities for also reducing transport-related social exclusion. So I think we've got an opportunity here to help strengthen some of that in the advice, because it is very much at the heart of where TFM is coming from. Around this isn't just about growing the economy, this is actually about, if we don't do some of these things, what it means for people in their communities, and what it means in terms of decarbonisation points that council need to make as well. Sure.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. I think it's important that we've done all this work and we should make sure we get the messages out there. Thank you very much, Charlie. We will move on to the next one, which in actual fact is Katie is going to start on. But this is the transport for decarbonisation priority activities update. Over to you, Katie.
Chair. So I'm not Peter Cole, I am decarbonisation. As you may have noticed, Peter is on leave, so I'm standing in today. I think I've met most of you before. I am TFN's Director of Strategy, Analysis and Communications here today. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. We shared this paper with the Executive Board back in April, and their feedback is reflected in it. Obviously, our intention is to take this to the main TFN board in 3 weeks' time. The background to the paper really was to give a stock take of where we are in delivering some of the ambition of the activities that we put into the TFN decarbonisation strategy in 2021, ahead of updating that strategy over the course of the next 18 months, including really baselining where we need to. I think probably before sort of delving into a few perhaps the highlights in the paper, I wanted to just reflect on the fact there's been quite a context change just in the last 6 months, with promised local transport planning guidance and quantified carbon reduction guidance expected, in that all 21 local transport authorities across the north of England will be preparing their responses and their LTPs in due course. And with that in mind, we've thought about what are the things and the activities from the evidence base that we've got to help make the case of change, to some of the policy work that we do, to some of the tools and analysis that we can provide to support our local transport partners in the work that they're doing, particularly when they're thinking about the quantified carbon reduction work that would be necessary for local transport plans. Perhaps just to pull out a couple of highlights in the paper, I'm taking it as read and happy to take questions. In relation to that support that we want to provide around quantified carbon reduction, we've been working on clean mobility visions. This will be a toolkit that will be available online to actually think about some of the policy choices that local authorities might need to make or want to make. For example, vehicle mileage reduction, modal shifts, and points that we touched on earlier as well. I think it's probably also worth pulling out the work on our EBCI framework that is now available on our website. It's being used and engaged with widely, and we're looking at how we develop that further and how we look at that more widely with other subnational transport bodies. And I think probably I would also pull out the work that we're doing around hydrogen refuelling, and that's work that we've just kicked off to look at the opportunities around that with one very by support, and again some sort of visualisation tool to help there. The other point probably I would just bring out, looking ahead a little bit more, and this actually links back to the conversation we had with the TFN board in March in the context of the strategic transport plan, is import freight, and actually thinking around the role that plays around decarbonisation as well. So we are later this month as well talking to the executive board around what the work programme to deliver our freight and logistics strategy needs to look like, and what activities within that can support wider decarbonisation objectives. So we've talked about already this morning around electrification, but actually what are some of the perhaps the quick wins that might be possible that could enable more freight to be transferred from roads on to rail that were suitable. So just looking ahead, the final part of the paper, as I said, mentions that we are intending to update the decarbonisation strategy. A lot has changed since we published that in 2021. And one of the key areas for us in looking at this is what we are calling inclusive decarbonisation. I've just mentioned the strategic transport plan and those 3 strategic ambitions. What we want to make sure is that decarbonisation is done in an inclusive way. And that actually we are able to address the challenge that we've got around transport-related social exclusion across the north of England through the work that we do. So some of the immediate work we've got in hand, such as looking at the travel choices work and the distributional impacts of decarbonisation policy, is how various options might impact different communities. You know, I've made the comment previously that electric vehicles are part of the solution, but not the whole solution, because actually they are at the moment still inherently more expensive than other internal combustion engine. And actually, if you are car dependent, because you haven't got bus services, you're in perhaps a rural community, how do we make sure that there is fairness and equality of access to ensure that people can get to economic centres and access the services they need? So we want to make sure that when we're looking at updating decarbonisation strategy, that we're looking at it through that lens of work of inclusive decarbonisation. I think finally, I would just also pull out that it's been forefront of our minds, I'm sure, when you look at the national news and sort of where some of the Committee on Climate Change reports have been in recent times about thinking around adaptation and resilience as well. And we're currently exploring opportunities to do some work that we would expect to be able to inform our future travel scenarios around how those move forward around resilience and different climate change resilience paths, and what those might look like in those scenarios in the future. Because actually it is thinking about some of those points in our highways network and our rail network and how those are resilient to changing climate as well. So that's a very broad brush overview, and we were very keen to just get your thoughts on how that sounded, particularly the sort of future direction and the frame that we're putting around this work to update the decarbonisation strategy ahead of talking it to this month. Yeah.
Thank you, Lacey. I think this is going a science story.
Switch this thing on.
I think this is quite a timely period. Certainly, it's been working just being a bit selfish there. But are there any questions for Lacey? I have some. I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Chair. That's good. So, yes, pretty much that really. So I was quite happy to read about 8.3, getting more of our freight back onto the rail lines. It's not so much going backwards, but it's going forwards. We took the decision as the major economy when we were to move them off rails onto flatbeds, but now we've got kind of the appetite to go back to that forwards. So it would be nice to see, because we all know around 60% of all emissions is our transport and logistics networks itself. So do we know what then that's going to look like? 8.3, the low carbon. Have we got any ideas, or is it going to mainly be opening up old freight lines that we used to use? Is it going to be connecting different routes? So, for instance, Drax goes from the west all the way to the east, but it goes all the way up rather than just going straight across, and that creates more than it really should for it being able to freight line. So, is it looking at those kind of solutions that you win?
The intention is we want to look across the board. We work that's led by our roads and rail directorate to think of some of the sort of practical opportunities and how TFN can facilitate those in terms of helping to make a case, bringing the evidence base to seek the investment that might be needed. What we've done importantly, and we were really excited to test through the implementation of strategic transport plans, we put what we call a ride share metric for freight. to try and actually put a line in the sand of actually where we want to get to in terms of getting freight off the road onto the rail. So the specifics sitting behind 8.3, they're not there at the moment in Council Kirby, but they will be things that we want to work on over the next few months to understand from partners what are some of those low hanging fruits, as the other one has been described to me, you know, small pieces of infill perhaps around electrification that actually we could, with our evidence base, help make the case for the right advice.
Thank you. And then very quickly, just on resilience. So is that looking at what contingencies we have for rails are likely to flood, that sort of thing when we talk about resilience?
That's the point. What's the, you know, what are the key pieces of infrastructure and what's the risk levels around resilience and what will be needed to help them adapt and be resilient.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, so it certainly seems to be some really good stuff being proposed. One of the questions that's written this is making this information potentially available and fairly friendly to transport. What are we doing in terms of making it accessible to the wide? Is this going to be available for public industry or will there any effects on transport?
Are you talking about anything specific?
Well, the various tools, the visualizer tools,
yes,
and so on. And there's a lot of information there that people will potentially be interested, but will it only be accessible through sort of specialist software that only the transport facilities will have?
So what I can do is give a bit of background of what we've done with our current EPCI tool and also our transport data tool. They are freely available, open source data on our website. So you can go into either tool, if I take the EPCI one, you can pop in your postcode and you can look at the opportunities and the likely demands for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And the same can be said with our TRC tool. Again, it goes down to postcode, but it actually goes down to ward level, I believe, to actually look at some of the factors that may be related to transport, may cause a transport related social exclusion. We're working through the kind of visualisation tools, the clean mobility and the hydrogen one, but my expectation would be that we would make those available if at all possible on our website, but they will certainly be available to support local transport authorities in their planning as well. They're very much internal planning tools, but actually as a member of the public, I think they're quite helpful to see and understand what choices that there might be and what could be made. So that would be our intention, where we've got data available, we've got tools available to ensure they're open to the widest possible audience. But I can't confirm completely on those two because we're still in development stages, but that would be my intention as a comms director, wanting to ensure we make things available.
The other thing you touched on was is the in terms of being stated. When I ask you what would there be a common strategy with the new organisations trying to get messages across to one public? You know, obviously very controversial voices. The city approaching that organisation, both for individual local transport, but and for us collective. We will be able to identify those best practices for individual local transport authorities in terms of taking strategy. Certainly finding both engaged in the choices that need to be made, but hopefully bring this in terms of facing up to it.
I think definitely, but I think it's a conversation we probably want to have with partners as to how we do that, because this is very much a partner effort. And I mean that in the broader sense. It's not just our northern partners, it's also the national bodies as well. Certainly we've had some initial conversations just before I joined TFM about what we can do around using the
TFN communication challenge to support that modal shift onto public transport and the whole life right campaign. But I think the value and it comes from those campaigns to shift together. But it is around, you know, growing that public awareness, understanding choices, and I would see it being able to create partnership. I'm absolutely happy to take that awareness in terms of our planning and refresh the strategy.
Yeah, it's just thanks for your presentation. Just in regards to obviously trying to get more people onto the trains, but also trying to get more freight. So it's really in regards to capacity. What you need to track. How do we get around that? Because if we get a lot more freight on that place, slow to get more passengers in the slow freight. So that we look at how we can actually do that.
The strategic position that the TFN will be taken is that we need NPR full, we need Trans-Pennine Route upgrade, you know, just to. So actually, it's not just about improving the current services we've got, it's about capacity for the future as well. And that capacity is, as you know, as you'll see in the draft strategic transport plan, is actually not just about creating a better railway for passengers, it's actually about how we can enable more freight onto the rail as well. I haven't got the technical delivery details here about what that would mean where, because those are not, I haven't got those to hand. But that's absolutely what it's about. It's not just around the current services, actually we've got to put more capacity there to be able to meet those demands.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Right, so I've got a few comments to make. I think the first one is that there's clearly a lot of really good work going on in terms of the charging lines, in terms of the hydrogen and strategy. So there's a lot to you know, really be impressed with. For hydrogen, one comment I would make, from what I'm reading about it, we're quite focused on larger vehicles, council fleets, whatever, which absolutely makes sense in terms of where the demand for hydrogen is likely to be in the short term. I would say that I would like to be sure that we wouldn't forget about the possibility of hydrogen for you know, private car use, whatever. We don't know exactly where we will be in 10, 20 years' time in terms of decarbonisation, and maybe that becomes part of how we achieve decarbonisation of the private vehicle in use. But it might not be forgotten, but I can see that in terms of how this is being built, this is focusing on you know, the most sensible routes for where there's likely to be carbon coming up. The other comment that I would make, I think, talking about inclusive decarbonisation is really valuable. I've talked in the past about concerns about rural isolation and deprivation, and indeed that's being picked up on. I also think more broadly, you could have concerns about, for instance, that in the north we've got some small businesses, and we've got, say, tradesmen who are very dependent on their vehicle to get out and about and to do their jobs. And there's a question, you know, what options at the moment would there be for them in terms of decarbonisation, and how could that be supported? And more broadly, I think that there should be thought about how to make sure that we don't price out those who are economically less well off as we move to decarbonise, that we don't price them out as the private vehicles entirely. I think there would be no better way to create a backlash against decarbonisation than for people to feel that it's making it impossible for them to live their lives. I would actually like to mention briefly, by the fact of Lancashire, that we have a little scheme that we've been doing for people who live in terrace properties who may struggle to charge an electric vehicle if they have them, where we've been sort of doing little trenches between their house and the road so that they can charge their vehicles. Now, I think that's helpful for maybe people who if they're making sure that electric vehicles aren't down with too much cost and difficulty, whatever. At the same time, we understand there are challenges with that. one thing you can't necessarily guarantee, because you always get the space outside your house. But I would be really interested if there are things that we can do to make sure that we're not pushing up costs too much for individuals who may not have that money to burn.
Some excellent points there. I think just a couple of immediate reflections. Obviously, this is a snapshot in the paper of the things that we're working on, and you've made a very valid point about alternative fuels for private cars, and that is still it's still in our work program, so we want to have a look at that. And I think also the point around life rate is what we might call it in terms of our cities and our towns. Is also something that I wanted to link back to our framework streams as well. Because again, it's about how we enable it, but equally it can also be a barrier for it can be a barrier trying to figure out social exclusion. So just understanding the climate, the data, and the evidence behind that, what might be some of the obstructions that we can consider. And I really like to, it's good to hear an example. There are houses. So I think I'll take all of those away and make sure that we've got those within our thinking strategy.
So, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it's nicer to hear that still playing away for all HS2. Because obviously, you know, looking at getting freight off the road onto rail, that's what it's about. It's about getting high speed, on board high speed passengers away from currently congested east and west coast main lines, so that they can belt along without any signal restriction. Not slowed down by a 50-mile-an-hour freight train, then some of the slow to town trains. So I said originally we badged it wrong. You know, it was focused on the high speed bit, not about the real issue, which is that the current system is up to its max on signaling. It's now full solid state, it's actual counters. They're all the count now, we can't put anything more down it. So, you know, it's very, very important that we just talk about. And it leads on to obviously how do we get freight onto, how do we get people on lorries, getting bigger, you know, just to prove that even bigger lorry now. So not only have we got, you know, talk about, even if they went hydrogen, we've still got tyre pollution, which is massive. Private cars and from trucks, particularly very dangerous to the health, especially in the motorway. As well as obviously the congestion of the cause, you know, with the troubles now, stuff going into lorries, dual carriageway, and there's line there. Intermodal is the key. But obviously your papers behind this, which is in here, maybe have a big push for intermodal, because the way to get it off many ports, all your big freights onto trains, you take them to regional intermodals, you can then transfer them onto even small battery powered lorries, but certainly medium-sized hydrogen powered ones. So you know, I think that's key. We're making that point very, very strongly. You know, there's some good intermodals around the country operated by ABP, for instance. You know, they do exist, but I haven't noticed any real investment over the last couple of decades. Obviously, I was in rail contracting. I've built a lot of these things, places like Hansford, you know. So, but there hasn't been any great investment. There's been lots of plans and things thrown up in various other power station sites, but I think the real block has been Network Rail and their ability to actually get any new site signalled into the system. So, you know, you've got a large field that's next to a railway line, you can put a turnout in, you can have great use mode for, can they actually get it on the signalling system? The answer to that, generally, from my experience in the past, was no, because they've simply don't have enough engineers to do with what they've got, in essence. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't push for it, of course. The other thing, of course, on looking at batteries, it's great. I mean, there's a big battle going on. We need to know where we are. There's campaigns that are against hydrogen for a variety of reasons. One is, obviously, when they're proposing hydrogen for boilers for the houses, they're looking at a mix of hydrogen and natural gas, because the existing natural gas pipelines won't take hydrogen, basically. It's too corrosive. They're not fit to take it. I think that science has been. So obviously it's going to need investment in, if they're going to pipeline it from the refineries, where they're going to make it and produce it, that investment needs to be put in. But they can't just bung it down natural gas pipelines. Or it would be nice if they could, but they can't. So, you know, we need to be clear on that. I think, as Matthew said, really, I'm waiting for a hydrogen car. I've just bought another diesel. You know, I haven't got batteries yet. And I think the other thing we need to be quite clear on is the amount rush to put charging points in is great. If we all turn to battery power now, all the lights will go out. There isn't enough power generation in the UK to support it. So you can't blindly keep putting in EV charging points without looking at the actual grid and the generation. And that's probably going to be maybe these mini reactors that Rolls-Royce is plugging, I guess, because to get into the bill off the ground and got those elements to be taken, you know, even if we wanted more nuclear now, we're talking decades, aren't we?
Well, I've come from the Office for Nuclear Regulation, so I know a little bit about that. A couple of responses. Multimodal intermodal, it's fundamental. It's covered in our freight logistics already. We've got that within the strategic transport plan. You made the right point that there's still lots of policy conversations going on about what's best. And I think probably our EV work is one that actually is a great example of what we've talked about in the new strategic transport plan around a whole systems approach. We can't just think about transport in isolation. We need to think about the digital connectivity, the energy systems. And one of the things that our EV tool does, and we've developed it with the energy company, the energy operators, to understand, therefore, where the energy distribution needs to be to enable people, you know, to charge their cars. The wider energy point, I think, is one that is not lost on into the government policy right now. Obviously, I'm sure you're not expecting to comment on that, but I think your point is really well made, Councillor. It's about thinking of it in the round. We can't just think about, you know, is it road, is it rail? It's got to be about how we use road, how we use rail, the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve, and actually how we align. You know, if you talk about East West Rail, we have the opportunity there, the opportunity from there to actually put down the 5 gig lines while the new railway is being developed. It's that kind of strategic thinking, what the outcomes that we want to achieve, rather than the sort of what's always been the old predict and provide approach. Yeah. It's more around actually let's decide and provide, and that is where we've got to with this second strategic transport plan, which is quite a shift from where the original one was.
Yeah. Can I ask a specific question about 9.3, the different travel choices? The second bullet touches about objective evidence, pricing and ticketing interventions. Is that solely from, in fact, the econometric point of view of the externalities, taking them into account, or is this also about understanding customer choice in terms of, you know, what differentials between bus prices, car park boundaries, all those types of things, influencing choice on? That's obviously a key piece of information for what transport societies and terms of market regulations.
That's my understanding. It's very much linked into the work that we're doing around transport links. And actually, where ticketing, pricing, etc., can be a barrier to access and a barrier to shifting mode. That's a bit more you can sweat on that because Matt's our connected mobility lead.
I think in my report I will touch upon some of it, but I think when we're looking at fares and ticketing reform, it's really about highlighting the local relevance of those fare structures. So it is about giving local authorities the ability to understand the financial economics of a fare set within their region, but also the viability of it from an operator point of view and how those align to different changing patterns of travel. So what do you do about off-peak, on-peak, historically? How do you integrate micromobility, hire cars, taxis, etc. Turn to that mobility as a service system, but you've got really complex fare models you have to work through. And I think one of the areas where I'm looking at, I'll touch upon later, is how we provide tools to assist authorities in understanding that modelling and making decisions around the appropriate fares for their particular place-based scenarios.
So what customer research will be done?
So one of the things that we're looking at is building on research by transport focus, which is method of payment, journey habits, etc. Working with government and ONS on outputs from the National Travel Survey to understand changes in sort of the type of journeys made, and then elasticities research around the actual economics of the prices for fare sets based on the National Fare Survey and similar resources that look at those geographical specificities.
Any other questions, please? Again. So I recently become climate change champion. I'm not sure what it means yet, because if everybody's looked at champions job descriptions, it's actually you write your own list. And you do the correct answer. I intend to do it the way that actually hopefully means that some of it will actually get to council. Council to be really thinking. I'm not, I'll be happy to be doing water sampling in rivers and stuff like that, but I really want to get strategic stuff done. So I welcome this. The first thing is I'm going to be sending this report to my transport people, the visualizer and stuff. You'll probably get the phone call, Matthew, asking you about the little things you've done in the, because that came up 2 weeks ago in our EV strategy. Should we be digging trenches down the pathway of Harrogate in particular? There was some raised eyebrows doing it just outside Betis, for example. But anyway, it's good to know that someone's got some experience with this that we can learn. One, I'll be doing that. The other thing that's coming up for our council is a local transport plan. And of course, we've got a consultation out to the public, but I don't think people realise that actually it all works into what I call the whole environmental change. So I'm encouraging people the residents to really sort of think about it in that if the local transport network, plan does not work with your forward bus plan, then you're going to have a mix. So they have to be integrated. And what I love about transport norms is how they hold things together. So there's a lack of siloing. You're not doing enough siloing, Katie. So people are looking across things, and I think this is very important. So very clever. The challenge we've got in North Yorkshire is only 3% of the population has access to train, and however much we want to, we will not get enough track down to give a lot more population. So we're going to have buses of hydrogen, and in actual fact, we've got our first hydrogen fuel station open later this year. In fact, it was Scoo, but I think the other one is just over the border of recovery, so I can't complain about it. So we've got to, I think it'll be green hydrogen. And even there's lots of colours of hydrogen probably all available. So I think this is really important. I take a look at private car use and hydrogen. I think that's definitely going to be something that's there. So I really welcome this report. And as I say, I'm looking better that one of the I don't know if you can even later and put it at the bottom. Make sure you share this with your council officers. The calls to action, because and I also would welcome Dave's point. We should be making it available to the public. That's so that they understand. So I think I do think also the quantified carbon reduction plans. That's also important. So again, start to just my day job is to actually coach, and often I say to people, when you travel from, you actually call a plane from New York to London. If you have, you may or may not want to know, but it's only on course for about 3% of the time. Because they know the destination, you've got computers. Those computers are constantly doing course corrections. So if we actually know what the destination number is at the moment, and I'm very concerned we don't know what the number is, we say net zero, but what is that? So it's important we do have these quantified targets so that we can do course corrections on the way. So I welcome that as well. You made some very worthy comments, John, about lorry size, tyre pollution, and so I think that's all worthy mentioned. So I'd like to thank you for the report. I think the committee will thank you for It's been well received, I believe. That's my perception. One thing you did mention was about energy, and I actually think the national grid, rather than fusion, or vision, I actually say the national grid is proper cheap energy right now, because in North Yorkshire, it's 2034 before we can then get big renewable energy connected to the grid.
So just a quick question. Did you say earlier on that we look to the open lines that being closed?
No, that's not, no, I will, I can't comment on specifics. But what I said is that actually where we're coming from strategically is it's about making the current service fit for purpose and better, but also additional capacity. And one of the things that we set out in our freight logistics strategy is actually where there might be those quick wins, those low hanging fruit, dare I say it, small chunks of railway that perhaps aren't appropriately gauge cleared, or where there's an interlink that could be built that would enable more freight to move from road onto rail. There's no statement about the opening lines.
Thank you so much.
Are there any more questions for Peter? Okay, in which case, I'd just like to say that I think we should note it that we welcome the fact that if we want the full, not quite the right phrases, the full NPR HS doing those one word as well. But I think we need that limited.
It's a position that the board have taken an initiative to apply a share to all agencies upgrade.
So, is that okay for all agents to do?
I was going to say garage, maybe refer to what's in the public domain already, and just strategic transport.
I just like us to endorse that. I think it's important to cover. It's a good idea too. So thank you very much for that. And now I'd like Matt to tell us all about connected mobility strategy.
Yeah, I think practically I've got some slides, so I get to hide from the camera first, and so I get to go back to drive it. So I planned that ahead quite well. Hoping this works. Excellent. So a bit of background. Last year, Scrutiny welcomed myself to bring some views on objectives and scope for a connected mobility strategy. This went to board in September of last year, agreeing those objectives and the scope. So this report is effectively to sum up how we are now moving away from that high level objective and scope into actually delivering implementation of that strategy, some outcomes, etc. I'm just going to run through some of the structure of the actual draft strategy. So it's version 2, it's an appendix to the report. I'm going to assume it's been read. I apologise that it's quite lengthy in terms of pages. It was shorter, but I took my glasses off and couldn't read some of it myself. But there we go. So we'll dive straight in. Connected mobility is some terminology that we sort of came up with last year. It began as the digital mobility strategy, which sort of started to preclude people who might not necessarily have digital accessibility, etc. And it sort of hones in on this message that this strategy is about keeping people connected to the things, the services and places that matter to them, both from a leisure point of view, an economic point of view, and sort of a place-based point of view. And it really is all about smarter ticketing, smarter journey provision, the integration of systems that support that. So that's fares reform, fare structures, technical databases, and actual integrated multimodal solutions as well. So that's sort of definition of the terminology which underpins all of it. In terms of our approach, historically, we had a programmatic delivery vehicle, which was the Integrated and Smart Travel Programme. We learnt lessons from the closure of that a few years ago and have pivoted our response to be, or also position in this area, to be more around adding value to our partners' work in this space, maximising the impact and benefit and scale of existing funds, existing projects, existing processes. So effectively, we have that pan-northern perspective on some of those work streams already in play in authorities, the ambitions that are shared across authorities, and start bringing together the collective delivery of those across multiple partners, multiple technical systems to minimise duplication of effort, duplication of cost, and to upskill capability and capacity within those authorities. So this is really driving around those areas of joint interest, where there's economies of scale to reduce costs, and then bringing together a longer term view of getting authorities together to make joined up funding bids for areas of technical innovation and development, fares and ticketing to avoid beauty contests for different bids or to avoid siloed development of quite complex technical systems. Now, in line with the strategic transport plan that's at consultation, the strategy is designed to be place-based. The north of England is a very diverse geographical area. We've got large conurbations, we've got the Liverpools, the Leeds, the Manchesters, but we've also got large rural areas, the Ribble Valleys, the North Yorkshire Moors. Each of those have different consideration when it comes to connecting passengers to those places, and the one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to work across those. What we need to do is provide targeted support based on those place archetypes to understand how technology can influence and support passengers within those regions and people going into those regions. So, for example, if we were looking at visitor economies, we'd be more looking at how that network can interface with other geographies and inbound passengers. If we're looking at transformational areas that have high car dependency, how do we develop systems and tools that promote migration from those cars to mass transit in those areas, and more economic development happens in tandem with that transformational piece. Second to that, and within that, is that the strategy is user-centric. We've touched upon some of this already, that there's varying levels of ability and understanding of how different fare structures work. There's a lot of complexity to those structures and a lot of demystification that needs to be happening around that. In tandem with that, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the past 3 years have seen fundamental changes in the way that people travel, expect to pay for travel. I think it's roughly around 94% of the population has access to the internet and 84% or 86% have access to smartphones. What we need to be cautious of as we start focusing on those areas is those percentages that don't have access to that, to make sure that as we develop these systems, we don't leave people behind. And this links into some of the work on social exclusion that we've been promoting and working through, that effectively, as we develop these fare structures and technical systems, it's done in such a way that those passengers that are reliant on public transport aren't pushed out of it because we make it all flash and tech and singing and dancing. Likewise, we need to understand how people are actually travelling. A lot of the assumptions we've made historically around fare structures, the availability and retail of products, are based on pre-pandemic travel trends and behaviours, the working week, Monday to Friday, a 9-to-5 working day. A lot of that has changed, but again, with a place-based approach, it's not changed everywhere. We still have large manufacturing bases within the north of England that continue to have Monday to Friday, 9-to-5 or shift pattern works. How do we embed that user-centric approach into how our authorities are supported in delivering reforms for connected mobility? And then finally, we need to go with industry on this piece. One of the key lessons that was learned from the IST programme is if you don't have all the partners on board from day one as you start developing and implementing these systems, they won't necessarily work or become too complex. And as soon as you lose that support, it damages the credibility. So with this, we need to be cognizant of the challenges around the finances, say bus operations, rail operations, the challenges around different regulatory models across the north of England, from franchising on one side for buses through to the change to national rail regulation and sort of enhanced partnerships. What does that mean in terms of how we support partners with different regulatory approaches? What governance structures do we need to provide capability and support to those authorities in ensuring they can speak to those operators in a way that gets the result that they want to have, but is also aligned with the operators not walking away from the table? So the strategy is split into 3 themes. This is quite a hefty thing, and this table is actually in the report, so I'm not going to go into the details. I'm going to take it as read. But the first theme is the future of ticketing, which is effectively what does ticketing look like for the north of England and beyond over the next few years. We've got multimodal ticketing, which is expected in 2 key national strategies. The bus strategy and the plan for rail is a key tenet for local transport ticketing, that by default multimodal ticketing should be in place. We've got that in various forms across the north of England, but our role is really to bring the learning from where we have got that in place, get some common systems and structures in place to empower those authorities that don't yet have it, to bring it in a uniform way that engages operators from day one, and we don't have complexity for passengers and participants. New and legacy smart card schemes. ITSO smart cards are generally the default media on which multi-operator products have been delivered. That's changing, and there's a touch point here in terms of barcode. However, concessionary travel products are required to still be smart cards, and there is a cost base for authorities in maintaining that system. If there is reduced commercial products going through that back office, what does that mean in terms of the viability? Can we get economies of scale by getting shared procurements? Pay as you go, I think it's fairly given that authorities and passengers alike want pay as you go in some format across regional areas. How do we make that easier for authorities to deliver in a way that doesn't have geographical boundaries? Fares and retail reform, we've touched upon that already, but effectively, how do we make it that our authorities and operators can deliver fare structures that work for passengers in a geographical tailored way, but one that doesn't have unintended consequences, so we minimise losers and maximise winners, so that's by providing fares modelling tools or understanding geographical zonal schemes. And then barcodes and new tokens as new systems come into play, where the source of thought leadership and advice and what that looks like for a authority and passenger. Now, these are some of the regional outcomes, and each of these exists for the 3 themes of the strategy and the draft strategy. Some of these we will be more directly involved in the delivery of. Some of them will be with partners that we're facilitating and hopefully making it easier for those partners to realise across the board, where there's legal authority partners delivering them. But I'd welcome, as we go through this, any views on some of these outcomes and whether or not we're missing any, if there's some that could be more prioritised, or if there's some which don't feel quite right, or there's areas we've not picked up. The second theme is the underlying data and infrastructure that support these things. So by and large, this is all around open data, open technical standards, shared specifications of technical systems. So when authorities are procuring systems, they're not different, they're not using different technical language, they're not costing various sums of money to consultants to produce effectively the same outcome. This is, if one area has done something, the data that underpins that can be used in another area, the specifications can be shared, and you can have collective procurement. This is also looking at the integration of that data. So how do we, from a regional point of view, ensure that the wealth of data is accessible to passengers across different modes, across different network touch points? For example, if you're going down the motorway, how do you as a driver see that there's a park and ride service for X pence or pounds that could take you to a city centre faster than a private car as part of that integrated journey? And then from an infrastructure and procurement point of view, a lot of these systems are dependent on 4G, 5G, there are big gaps. Obviously, those are linked to rural areas as well. How do we start mapping that to make sure that as we develop these systems, we don't have authorities spend a load of money on a system that doesn't necessarily work or has gaps in the provision for passengers that require them? And again, these are some of the outcomes linked to these. We will be delivering some of them directly, some of them indirectly, and some of them in a facilitative way. And then the final theme is future mobility, which is effectively the forward-facing element of the strategy that starts to look at how new modes of transport are emerging and how those are integrated with a local authorities network, how they sort of work the fares structures for, let's say, for example, demand responsive transport, micromobility. How do you integrate an increase in EV usage with a network to mitigate the risk of congestion of just having combustion cars in a city or whatever replaced by a single occupant EV vehicle? How do you integrate that fare structure if you've got a park and ride system? How do you integrate and reward active travel? So if you're making a journey and using, say, Google Maps, for example, you can put a 10-minute walk break between modes of transport, and that's a holistic thing that you can plan to be active travel as a part of your journey. And also, how do you reward that? Let's say, for example, you've done 10,000 steps, you can have 50p off your next bus fare or something along those lines. And then connecting to mobility hubs, which touches upon, let's say we've talked about Manchester Airport, for example, is how do we have it set up in a way that if you're an external visitor to the region, you can continue to travel on in whatever area you're arriving in the north of England before you've even arrived. You don't have to research complex structures. The system is set up to be open and interoperable from step one. And again, these are some of those outcomes that are in the draft strategy. That was a very sort of quick, rapid work through some of those things. Now, I guess what I'm really keen to see is, or understand from the committee, is where there's questions, areas of concern, or areas of agreement and endorsement of some of those outcomes, and just general views on what's probably a fairly hefty strategy document.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to ask the first question, if that's okay. Well, even if it's not, I'm going to ask it as much. One of the things I heard that we've got to understand how people travel. I believe that needs to be a lot more granular than people, because women travel different things with men, travel different things with children, and I think that creates different outcomes. So, for example, there is a council in Scandinavia, which then became dominated by women. And instead of clearing the snow off the road so the men could drive to work, it cleared the snow off the pavements so that the women could walk their children to school safely. And the unexpected outcome was that there good the NHS, the hospital bills went down dramatically because of a lot less accidents. And I just think that we need to. Sorry. Well, if my wife was in the room, I would certainly be saying about that. But what I'm saying is that we need to, it needs to be more granular than people. And often we look at things from our own viewpoint and we have to find a way to make sure we look from others aspects as well.
Yeah, one of the really beneficial outputs from the former IST programme is a set of consumer personas, which effectively takes that I'm a passenger, but there's different types of passenger, and it is linked to that. I think what probably the starting position will be to take those personas and update them in terms of a post-pandemic view of, are they still relevant? If they are, how do we focus research around that? But I think from a user-centric point of view, we can't design fare structures or support the designing fare structures if we're sort of spreading assumptions that everyone has the same travel habits. So I think it really needs to be baked in. So I'd agree with that.
Thank you very much.
Really good presentation. So my concerns are like you say future ticketing. Are you going to work with the operators? Like at the moment we are struggling, like if it's a Transparent Island, they're not working with the Northern, vice versa is like if I can talk about buses, Viva is not talking with the first. So passengers are struggling. If they go one ticket, they can't go to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to work like as a London, or it's going to be a different? But Manchester is totally different. They have got traffic and everything.
I think when we look at the place-based side of things, we need to tailor the approach based on those types of geographical locations. So, for example, if you're looking at a large city region, a fully integrated network has to be the default position, and that takes away the challenge of multiple operators. If you're in an area that's outside of that direction towards franchise, for example, you need to have, and this is where we provide support, governance and administration structures around those schemes that make it easier for operators that might be working in 6 or 7 different areas to engage with them. Those 6 or 7 areas don't have different governance structures, different apportionment methodologies, for example. That means you have sort of standardized background approaches, but keep sort of passenger variation. So that's really where we'd be focusing a lot of our energy. And one of the areas that we're keen to look at is how ticketing schemes in the north of England are currently deployed. So, for example, you've got M-Card in West Yorkshire. What learning can we take from that to deliver standardised governance that ensures that operators have as few reasons as possible not to engage with those and are in fact involved from day one in around that? So, I mean, my background is with the operator side of stuff, so I'm acutely aware of the challenges around that, and it's a key area of focus of mine.
Yeah, like you're saying M-Card. Yeah, M-Card is good for the new generations and things like that. But what about the older generation? They haven't got any clue how to tap on, tap off. So are you still going to be facilitating them as well? Keep thinking about that as well? Because you can't ignore.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that need to be had in mind when we look at the user research is levels of technical literacy as it applies to ticketing. So at what age is there a challenge point? What does that align with the National Concession Travel Scheme, which is smart card orientated and quite a simple thing to access? What's the behavioural and education piece from moving away from that commercial fare paying passenger to a concessionaire? Is that fundamentally different, or is there an opportunity as part of that migration from one to the other to educate on different systems? Do we start moving CTS, for example, to more technical solutions? Alternatively, what is the non-technical solution that remains available for accessibility reasons? So, for example, if English isn't the first language, a lot of these technical systems don't work. If you're struggle from an accessibility point of view, you need to have alternates. So I think what the key area of this is getting some of those underlying structures that support simpler fares, easier accessibility, as uniform as possible, to allow the capacity and space to do those bespoke extra added support for passengers on top of that, so we don't get bogged down in duplicating 16 different technical solutions. We have one technical solution or 3 or 4 that work in different areas, and local authorities can focus on how that is delivered to passengers effectively in their region, and there isn't gaps in that provision.
So you're depending on the local authorities. It's not like region-wise you're doing something.
No, the way this is going to work is either we'll have sort of collective authorities with common aims and we'll group them together with a collaborative piece of work, or we'll take learning from existing things. We're not looking at developing a centralised programme of work to deliver this, because that would take far too long. There's a lot of work already in motion that's really good work. We want to take the learning from that, expedite it and scale it across other regions, and where possible identify multiple local authority partners for a standalone programme, with one of them as the lead authority that sort of procures that piece of infrastructural system.
You're going to restrict to the fares as well, so. The fares are.
Yes, yes. So fares reform is a big thing, both across the railway and bus, and looking at how new modes interface with those and what the pricing structures will be.
So I usually ask an analytical question, or quantifiable. One of my biggest concerns about the North of England is that it costs 3-4 more times what it costs in London, or if you're on public transport. So that just can't be right. But apart from whether that's just or not, I would like to see some numbers, or I think you need to put some numbers in, because you say what the benefit is to the people of England. And if you have, I don't know, you were 88 pages in. If I missed it in what was buried, I apologise, but I do think we need to talk about what the benefits are going to be for the residents, as well as perhaps the train operators, or all the public transport operators. I do think that it's about people again today. You, John.
Yeah, well, just a question really about it. When I first came onto this panel, we were engaged in smart ticketing.
Yes.
And lots of money was spent trying to do the smart ticketing, and of course it fell flat because the bus operators had already developed their own particular systems and they didn't want to play ball. What's changed? So that's first thing. Second one, really just an observation. FM5 on the little chart talks about a great idea. You know, you pull up and you pay for your charging while you're travelling. The only thing I observed is that some people, when they're charging the vehicles, actually get fined for overstaying. So if you're going to pull up at a parking lot and spend the day in York, you're going to plug in your car and you're going to pay for your charging, then you're obviously occupying that charging point for the entirety of your journey, whether that be in a station car park or in a. So I just wanted to, you know, has that been given any thought?
No, that's an early stage one where we're looking at how the rollout of EVCI progresses and what that means. That really needs to have local authority engagement around the practicalities of that. But this is sort of a future-looking thing. This is something that is worth exploring. Those challenge points need to come out early days before we actually progress these things. So I really welcome that view. But what we need to be cognizant of is that as more people do have EVs, they need to be steered to not going into sort of urban centres and just recreating congestion challenges we have. So we need to have some idea of how we integrate that car as a mode of transport within a holistic network. And that's just one option, but that's an area we need to look at. So if there's challenge points like that, then they need to be teased out as early as possible. Just on the first point, in terms of what's changed since the last approach, I think the previous approach TfN took was a capital-heavy delivery programme. Times have changed materially since then, both from a technical point of view, but also the pandemic's had a large impact in terms of the operators' financial position and ability to invest in these systems themselves. So I think, broadly speaking, by the technical systems that exist out there are far less complex than they were 4 or 5 years ago, which required that heavy capital investment. We can benefit from open data, standardised services, disruptors in the marketplace. What we want to do is make sure that our authorities and operators are aligned and part of that disruption and not steamrolled by it by third-party technical providers.
Thank you. Are there any questions from that? Sorry.
No, thank you, John. I'm just planned up. There's a few points that I'm interested in. So, well, the first point is, as a general comment, I think it's really interesting the report, particularly like the industry context, passenger context, and place context. I think the examples of place context work really well. I do think, however, the executive summary is a little bit dull, and I feel that I'm sort of dozing off. And then it would sort of discourage you from giving the attention that you should give to the rest of the report. I don't know whether you can take that away and look at that. Next comment would be, I was very interested in the graph on page 48, which showed Anglia Belgium, Midlands, London, and the North. Now, in terms of London, I'm sort of hypothesising here. We see a large pool of presumably due to the tube and the coast base and see whatever. And then it's rocketing into the 2022 and onwards. is that due to, or to what extent is that due to new investment, cross-rail, whatever? And I'm sort of wondering if there is a story there that essentially investment works and investment is seeing increasing passenger numbers, even in a context where, you know, there might have been changes of behaviour post-COVID. We should sort of be making the point, well, actually, we should be seeing that investment here, and, you know, it wouldn't be right for the investment to dry up for the north on the basis that maybe we've not quite got the passenger numbers that we might like to have just at the moment. Because the point is, you know, if you build it, they will come. I don't know, I just thought in terms of that chart, maybe there was something going on there that was worth talking about. Next comment I wanted to make was towards the back on the future of ticketing. Again, really interesting. I thought about the mention of the micro mobility, that there was a kind of watching brief and building an evidence base for how that could be integrated into future. That's really interesting. I did wonder that, and I've mentioned in the past that we shouldn't just think about rail and buses. For instance, what about ferries or whatever? Should there be an openness to integrating other sorts of public transport into the ticketing? Striking micro-mobility stuff is also part of that picture. But I guess, again, the thoughts takeaway could be think about ferries and certain other aspects. Maybe talk a bit more about trams, that sort of thing.
Really, now, if I take each of those in point, I think on the executive summary, I'm probably in agreement with yourself. We've had some feedback that it needed a bit of punching up, and there is going to be a version 3 that goes to the main board, so that will change for that one. The graph that you mentioned, you're entirely right with the hypothesis. The jump in the London numbers is due to the Elizabeth line opening, and so former London Underground usage moving into National Rail numbers. So there'll be a little note and a caveat to that in the report. I'll have to speak with other officers to determine what language we put around that, because there is links across rail investment and all those kind of things potentially. And then just on the final point, I think with a lot of these things, my view and sort of what we need to work through probably for version 3 is to highlight the modal agnosticity of it, that it's not around rail, it's not around bus, it's around holistic networks that work for particular places. So where there are ferries, by default, they need to be integrated. Where there's light rail, it needs to be integrated. So that falls into the place-based approach, that if you're looking at the geographical demands, if there's different modes of travel, the assumption would be they should be integrated into that network in some format. What does that look like? And the complexity of that is how do you get the fair price right for that, or the fair structure right for that?
Okay. Any more questions from Matt at all? Okay, so I'll just so we're not saying you're done, Matt, for the executive summary. My honest suggestion would be to take that bit out that says that's the kind of key speed routes, and I would just start our connected mobility strategy sets out we look to this. If we don't know who we are by now, it's a bit late, and maybe talk to the comms director about it. But perish the thought. Matthew, I thought that was an excellent observation on that graph, so thank you very much. The mere investment of 30 billion for Crossrail is shows what you can do with it. So thank you very much. So I'd like to thank everybody for their. Have you got anything written down about this? Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank everybody for their contribution on this item on all items. I just need to say that the next meeting is on Tuesday, the 5th of September, and it will be a students' meeting at the moment. So, but no doubt you'll get lots of handout from us in the meantime. So thank you very much. I'll now close the meeting.